All right. The 8th commandment. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. I let the junior confirmands reduce this to, you won't lie. When they're doing the short, before each session, we do a quick review of all the 6 chief parts, and I let them reduce those. That one we reduced to. Of course, it's much more than you shall not lie. But what does this mean? Who wants to read that for us?
You should fear and love God so that we do not tell lies about our neighbor, betray him, slander him, or hurt his reputation. By defending him, speak well of him, and explain everything in the kindest way.
Okay, explain everything in the kindest way, put the best construction on everything. This is one of those things, oh yeah, don't lie, don't bear false witness. I got that one down. That's what we often like to think.
Till you get to the speak well of him part.
Yeah, well, and a lot of times we violate this commandment simply by not saying something when we should. I mean, remember we talked about the negative and the positive, both don't do some things, but also when someone is doing these things in Christian love, we're supposed to say, no, they probably shouldn't be, even if what we're saying is true in the presence of, not in the presence of another person, if it reflects poorly on them, and they're not there to have the discussion, especially if it has something to do with an offense that they've done against me. Matthew 8 is very clear on that. 18 is very clear on that. I'm to go to that individual. I can't, if I'm complaining to Gary about Josh, I'm breaking this commandment. That's how that works. So we don't, because what is Gary going to be able to do? Gary's going to be, Pastor, did you speak to Josh? That's the only thing that's his proper response. If he hears me complaining about anyone in the room, which I would hope I wouldn't do. All right. What does God forbid in the 8th commandment? A, let's read that.
God forbids us to tell lies about our neighbor in a court of law or elsewhere. That is, to lie about, lie to, or withhold the truth from our neighbor.
What's that last line there? Say that again.
Gosh.
Withhold the truth.
Oh, withholding the truth. No, that's so difficult. What if?
The truth
Well,
may not be my
yeah,
truth.
what if? But what if by them finding out it hurts their feelings? I'm gonna let them believe something different so that their feelings aren't hurt. Doesn't that sound altruistic and kind? It still violates this commandment. Now,
Shoot, this is a tough one.
it's a tough one. A lot tougher than we think. Now, there's a passive version of this. This addresses the passive reality. Sometimes we don't tell a lie, but if we know someone believes something that is untrue and we withhold from them the truth, letting them go on thinking something, then now does that mean, one of the favorite tricks that people use in group prayer, when they violate this commandment during the getting ready to pray process. You know what they do? We need to pray for so and so. Let me tell you why. You see, we don't go that route either. So basically, if your heart is heavy to pray for somebody, if it's heavy enough to pray for them, it should be also heavy enough to speak to them. But even if you don't have the courage to that, at least you can in a group setting say, I just want to lift up individuals in prayer, but I'm going to keep who it is in my head and pray for them. Even in that route. So, but when I get back to the passive thing, this is one of those difficult realities that we deal with as Christians. If I know, does that mean I'm required to proactively ensure that everyone around me knows all truth that there is about myself and others? No, that's not what this is saying either. Especially if there's a truth that you know is having no effect, it doesn't even really address another person. Not filling them in on that pain and suffering is not violating this commandment. What I'm pointing out is not filling them on something that they believe in ignorance, that they take actions on and they're connected to. If a person goes on and on believing that, let's do person A and person B, so we don't get it. A person B has said or done something that might cause the person A to be in a state of danger if they continue a particular race relationship. There's a burden upon me to tell person B, if you don't reveal that this person can make a responsible decision about whether or not they can trust you. At least give them the option. That's when, is it too
Well, you
To
can
our
read
peers.
a lot into that, but let's say B says, are you going to A?
Well, I tell B this, and it's hard to do hypothetically without actual. Okay, let's do something easy with trusting with money. Okay, a person is a financial advisor, and you know that individual has had some dealings where the courts have fined them for dishonesty and those sorts of things, and you know that they're doing business with person A, and you maybe even are still doing business with that person. Even though you know that they've had issues, they've paid their price, and they've said they're sorry, and they move on. And someone else comes in and says, hey, that's your financial advisor, what do you think? Then, before the new financial situation, you need to make sure that person knows, look, I still do business with you, even knowing the past, but you need to give that person the same benefit of making their decision that I made. If you won't do it, and you could pursue this financial engagement, whatever it is, then it's incumbent upon me to share that. So you it's not a blackmail. It's saying, God calls me to speak this truth. If you don't do it, then I have to. You're basically saying, you can be mad at me for being a tattletale, but I'm doing what God tells me to do. I have to obey God rather than man. Yeah, so but you give them at least the opportunity. And then once you give it to them, then at least they can share it in a way that colors themselves in a proper light, which you may not be able to do. It doesn't change the truth. It just, I need to tell you why I did what I did. I paid the price for it. I'm sorry, and we move on. That actually, if I'm making financial decisions and somebody has that in their past and they share it with me, I'm probably more inclined to do business with them because they're upfront with me in the beginning. Instead of me finding out about it later, which I will definitely, not that I ever had any money to invest anyway, but then I would say, you know what, you should have told me this, so I'm going to move my funds somewhere else. Does that help a little bit with the passive and where you would be burdened to tell someone, if you don't share this, I have to? There is a legal precedence for this, which kind of applies to what I do as a pastor and what people do as counselors. In all 50 states, there are laws that require someone who learns something that could be detrimental to a child. It requires them to report. Now, if someone confesses to me a murder, I can carry that to the grave with me, and the laws of this land will not require that I have to say anything. But if I have knowledge of a child that is in a state of continual physical or mental abuse. Now, as an individual, I'm going to have to decide I'm not cross this bridge, Lord willing, I won't have to. But the laws of this state and all 50 states require that I report it. Or I would be held negligent in some court finding that might come later if it's found out that I knew something and I didn't say anything. Now, I actually hold my commitment to God a little bit higher than the state. So although I know that maybe withholding something would break the law, then I might withhold it at the same time. I got to tell you, I have a real hard time with letting one person hurt another person. So I'm going to be, in my best, in the best interest of all involved, I'm going to do everything in my power to prevent any ongoing pain or suffering, regardless of what the state has to say, while doing my best to maintain my vows to God. I can't hypothetically tell you how I do that because, Lord willing, I won't ever have to deal with that. But should I cross that, and if I came from a position of experience, I might share it with you someday and change the name to protect innocent, those kind of things. Okay, and I say it flippantly, but if you're a parent and you have ever addressed the question in your mind, would I be willing to give my life for my child, is really kind of an easy question to answer. Now, as they get older or younger, at different times in the relationship, that might change. However, for the most part, most parents at some time in their parenting would say, I would willingly give my life to my child. So, in a hypothetical way. In the reality way, it might be a little more difficult, but still doable. Okay, B. On page 88, we're going to bypass some of the narratives because we gave a lot of examples.
Thank you. God forbids us to betray our neighbor, that is, to reveal our neighbor's secrets.
So, now this kind of is a little bit different take on it now. Just because I know something about financial advisor A, that he has something in his past that might affect his business, doesn't mean I'm required to broadcast that to the world. That's what this is saying. I have responsibility when I know something to deal with those people involved. Each one of it would be, and here's the thing, God's word is clear. Right and wrong is clear. However, there's lots of extenuating circumstances that determine for us how we're to act in a situation. Although the line is still clear, understand it. So like you heard me say before, there's no such thing as a little white lie. A lie that is a lie is 100% lie, no matter how small it is. Even if it doesn't hurt somebody, it's a violation of the first commandment. It makes me God. I can choose to change that truth for my own benefit or for the benefit of others. And I would argue that the reason no lie is little is because it has a motive behind it. And there's I don't know if I've been so long exposed to German savings, I don't know if this one is in English as well, that lies have short legs.
Lies have short legs.
Yeah, that's a German phrase, lies have short legs.
Oh, lies.
Yeah, the reason they have short legs is because what usually ends up having to follow one lie. If it's important enough to tell a lie about it, guess what? It's going to come up again. And you're going to have to tell another lie. Either affirming the first lie or a new lie to deal with some inconsistency that came out because of that lie. That's lies have short legs. They basically, they fall apart. They trip upon themselves. Okay, so I'm not obligated. Proverbs 11:13. Who wants to read that?
The gossip betrays a confidence, but a trustworthy man keeps a secret.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's Proverbs 11:13.
That's what mine says.
That's the NIV.
Oh, I don't know, it's the blue one.
That's NIV.
What does yours say? Something very
The
different?
ESV says, it says the same thing but a lot of different words. Whoever goes about slandering reveals secrets, but he who is trustworthy in spirit keeps the thing covered.
Gee whiz. That's quite different. It says the same thing.
It does say the same thing, but a whole different group of
I was
words.
going to say, but I'm in nice and short and sweet. See,
Well,
that's
yours is,
long.
well, this is a great example, huh?
I mean,
This
this
makes the
one
point.
certainly makes the point
Yeah.
Right.
very succinctly.
Fewer words.
This is the difference between remember I told you in biblical translations you have the wooden and the dynamic equivalent. Dynamic equivalent NIV. This does not read smoothly what I read to you, but it's a closer reflection of the Hebrew. Although they both say the same thing, this one was leaning more on the vocabulary, while that one was leaning more on grammar. Now they both, the NIV still tried to stay true to the vocabulary as best it could, but we don't talk this way, you know. He who goes about slandering, revealing secrets.
He who goes is right off the bat.
Yeah, whoever goes, right. Yeah, we don't talk that way, but that's trying to stay closer to the, so C, who wants to read that one? In the middle of page 88.
God forbids us to slander our neighbor or hurt our neighbor's reputation.
Okay, so apply that to the example I just gave earlier. Is it slanderous of me to tell person B about A's financial issues?
Well, you've got A and B mixed up here.
Oh, do I?
B is the financial.
Oh, okay,
issues.
then B's over here. The
So-
financial advisor to the prospective customer. Is it slanderous of me to tell the prospective customer, just like I told you you probably should in my example, is it slanderous of me to tell them?
Only if B didn't. I mean, only if you didn't give B the option.
Well, and that's the point. It's clear once you follow, you're applying Matthew 18 here. in essence. You're saying, I need to confront you because I have knowledge of something that might affect that person, and you need to share it. You know, and that's not an easy thing to do. It's not easy to tell that person or that person if this one refuses.
But
You know?
Is it slander if it's true?
Well, and see, that's my point. Is it slander if it's true? I would say if you share it over here without having first had the discussion over here, it's slanderous. Because you're harming someone's reputation, though it may be true. That's the point with gossip. It doesn't matter if it's true. It matters if and even let's say in a group of 3 people, do any of these people have any interest, vested interest in the topic being discussed? That's another thing. Just because I know this person has this thing in their past, doesn't mean that any of these people have need of that knowledge. In the military, we have something called need to know. You see, you have 2 things. You have a level of clearance, and this, interestingly enough, it helps you process the thought. You have a clearance. My highest level of clearance for a few years in my career was top secret. But I didn't have access to all top secret information. Only the top secret information that had to do with my job, my vocation. In the same way, when we're determining whether or not this group of people should be discussing problems with, for example, in elders meetings, we often, I as pastor, share things that people are struggling with because their elder and I need to pray for them and help them to deal with that. It's not a gossip session. And there's times when pastors actually find that people aren't happy with the things that they're saying and doing. It happens. So, the pastor, in our setting, I think our setup is as biblical as you can get for church polity. I have a group of individuals whose job it is to advise me in these sticky questions, you know. So they have an interest because of their vocation as elder and my vocation as pastor in the things that are going in person A, B, and C's life who are members of this congregation. That same conversation I couldn't have with anyone else without violating confidence. Because now this is not about confession. Just because I know something doesn't mean I'm bound to take it to the grave. If it wasn't shared to me in the form of a confession, if I have knowledge of something, then I, as a member, a citizen in this community and the community that we live in, have responsibilities. If I have knowledge of something that's illegal and someone didn't confess it to me, then I'm going to follow Matthew 18, and I'm going to go to them and say, look, you need to make right what's gone wrong here. Now, if the person is someone I'm afraid might shoot me, then I might bring somebody along like a police officer to protect me. But the point is, I'm still burdened with sharing that information with the proper authorities. That's not being a tattletale or a snitch. When you're growing up, the oldest of my 3 sisters was one of her favorite things, to inform mom and dad what was going on, you know. The thing is, the motive for sharing the information is what drives whether or not it's in accord with God's will. If on numerous occasions my loving sister went to let mom and dad know what was going on because she knew that we would get in trouble. That was her only motivation. But there were other times, and I would say as she got older, where she did the same thing, and our best interest was the motivation for her information. So, even though she knew we would be mad at her, she knew it was better for us to be mad at her than it was for us to deal with the consequences of whatever we were thinking about doing. You know? So, you see, it's all about the motivation behind the conversation. Does that clear anything up or make it muddier?
You know, the problem is, without stretching this too far, is let's use your example of having top secret clearance.
Okay.
You are given precise information.
Correct.
There's a manual that tells you exactly
Right.
in the Air Force how much thrust, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
So any decisions you make on that are made on the basis of fact.
Right.
The problem with interpersonal relationships is that they're pretty damn vague, excuse my language. I mean, there's such subtleties in the...
Well, and here's the thing. Anytime we come across something that's vague or unsure, the first step is to gather and clarify information. Not to be nosy, but to say, you know what? It's come to my attention that you said or did something you shouldn't have. And as your friend or pastor or fellow parishioner, I need to make sure that, we're okay. You said or done something, maybe I need to apologize, maybe you need to apologize, whatever it is. But if we don't talk about it, then it sits there and festers. And I suspect the worst of you, and you think everyone's out to get you.
Well, maybe they are.
Yeah, just because I'm paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get me. I like that.
But let's go back to your financial.
Okay.
The business of the white collar thing is so subtle. Anything can be illegal. Just depends on the prosecuting attorney.
Right.
Trust me, ask Conrad Black, for example,
Mhm.
if you've heard of him.
No.
He was mocked and pilloried for 42 million times, millions of dollars worth of legal fees.
Uh-huh.
He was innocent.
Uh-huh.
It was very clear.
Well, let's say that guilt and innocence in an American legal sense is not anything that concerns the Ten Commandments.
Indeed, but it concerns what we say.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not-
Exactly. So let's say someone was this is a good thing. This is a good example. Now let's say that someone was accused of something, and acquitted. And even though the court system has found them innocent, you have knowledge that contradicts that information. Then you still have to act in accord with that individual with what you know, not with what the court has found. Does that mean that you might be liable if you share information with them after having confronted them? You share with somebody else and they might sue you? Well, guess what? Yes. But we must obey God rather than man.
But likewise, that works in reverse.
Right.
Maybe you know something, before the day is out, each of us will break at least 3 federal laws.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, yeah, that many of them.
Well, yeah. It's interesting, talking about breaking laws. Pay attention to today's sermon. Pastor Deborah got some good, it's a really great sermon today.
It is.
Anyway,
And are you going to say I will the next time?
yes.
Just wondering.
Yeah, it's got such a great, you guys, we don't want to ruin it for
Yeah,
you,
we
so we'll
won't
stop
ruin it.
talking about it.
Well, now we want to hear about it.
Yeah.
That's-
No,
You will.
That's what we're talking about, it's part of the story. See, now we have this whole different picture of you. Either it's grammar or it's a,
You're gonna know exactly what we're talking about when it happens. See, and that's what I'm talking. Sometimes, like this talks about almost like entertainment. If I tell you the end of the movie, that's really not nice. I take away from you the surprise ending, so to speak. But in issues of personal, honesty between individuals, if I come to you and let's say I have knowledge that the court has acquitted you, but I have knowledge and I say, look, you and I both know this happened because you and I saw this. I'm not trying to get you put in jail for it, but I'm telling you that anyone I know who does business with you, you will share it with them or I will share it with them. And we'll let the courts deal with it as it may. Now, remember we talked about last week about the responsibility to care your neighbor. That's part of it as well. Protecting our neighbor is connected to this. If I know that someone has said or done something, and if I know that, now, you see if someone has apologized for something and paid the price for it and all those sorts, that's different. If someone maintains a falsehood, that increases my responsibility to protect my neighbor against them. And that's speaking the truth in love is no cakewalk. I'm not saying that it is, but God's word is pretty clear. And sometimes we've got to be ready to take it on the chin for doing the right thing, no matter how unpleasant it is. Because our society is and will continue to get worse in the realm of, knocking those on the chin who speak God's truth. I mean,
well, it all, in this society, it all depends on how you look at it.
yes, well, the definition of is always is in this community.
Exactly.
Only those who've been around for a while, and I think everybody here qualifies. Maybe you guys were younger when the definition of is was in question in our legal system.
I remember it.
You remember, okay. You were probably in high school. Okay. Where are we?
C. Finished C.
Yes, we just did C. What does God require of us in the 8th commandment? A. on the bottom.
We should defend our neighbor. That is, we should speak up for and protect our neighbor from false accusations.
Okay, now we're going to change the whole picture, and now we're in a group of people and they're sharing something about person A who's not there. Now, not only are we to say, hey, we really shouldn't be talking about them, but by the way, I know what you're saying to be false. You're saying something that I know to be false, and I need, now it's incumbent upon me, if I know something that will make another person's reputation be protected, because what is being said there I know to be false. What does that mean? That means you're calling someone in that group a liar. And people don't like to be called liars, and they'll get defensive. However, you have the benefit of, chances are the person is not sharing firsthand knowledge. So
They might shut up.
then they might be quiet, or they might say, well, so-and-so said. Now you have a new responsibility. Now you are to go to so-and-so and say, you know, so-and-so told me that you said this about so-and-so. We got a lot of so-and-sos in there. They all have the same name. But, and I want you to know that's not true. And guess what? They're either going to get defensive,
So-and-so told me.
or they're going to tell you somebody else told them. You know, like I say, speaking the truth in love is no cakewalk. B. On page 89, who wants to read that?
We should speak well of our neighbor. That is, we should praise our neighbor's good actions and qualities.
Speaking well. And there's some great examples in here that I would recommend you read. And I don't know why there's one I was looking for. Basically, this is the positive side of the commandment. We are required to uphold our neighbor's reputation. It doesn't matter if we like them or dislike them. They're our neighbor. And if someone is speaking unkind words about them, even if those words are true, this is one of those things that you say, we really shouldn't speak about so-and-so if they're not here to defend themselves. See, now you're not dealing with the truth of the statement. You're dealing with the fact that the conversation is being had in a way that violates the commandment. Okay, so that's the shade of it there. And help me out here. The couple that sold land and
Sephora and,
they sold land and only gave half of it.
Sephora and,
Where is that, in Matthew somewhere?
Acts.
Or it's Acts, it's in Acts. And basically, they lied to God, and what did God do to them?
I know.
When she came in to be confronted, her dead husband had just been drug out. And they dragged him out, and after she was confronted, they gave half of the sale of the property, but they said they gave all of the proceeds. They lied to God and His church. Now, the church part, I don't think that we should ever be prosecuting people for giving us half of a sale of the property and lying to us. I think we should tell them, you really shouldn't lie. Let's do some confession and forgiveness here. But God wanted to make a clear point that violating any of these commandments is an offense that is punishable by death. Because that's it. I mean, what did James say? If you break one, you break them all. So no matter how small it is, and had they come in there with a sense of repentance, I'm quite sure the whole sequence of events would have been very different. I'm sorry I lied. Okay, well, we have another situation. We need to deal with how to make it right, including, a combination of forgiveness from God because of what Christ did on the cross, but also, lies have consequences, and we have to deal with those. Sometimes those consequences are little. Sometimes those consequences are big in human interaction. This is why we have levels of punishment for murder within our society, because, accidentally killing somebody because of your negligence is not the same thing as killing somebody because you didn't like them and you wanted to kill them. In the interpersonal realm. Okay? Well, there you go. That's our full discussion on bearing false witness. Are there any thoughts or questions before we go to 9 and 10?
Okay, well, you just skipped over one that I think applies to you, and you've said this 1,000 times.
What's that?
C, put a positive meaning on everything,
You know,
a best
You're
meaning
right.
on everything.
well, yeah, positive spin. Is it lying to embellish?
Sometimes. I
It
think.
speaks to the motive.
Yeah.
Is it lying when a proud parent tells what a great job Johnny or Jimmy or Susie did on the soccer field when they were 4 years old?
No, it's just annoying.
But the point is,
What an attitude.
you know,
I love kids, really.
the exchange, what they're sharing is not doing anything more than sharing with you the excitement about what their child, and maybe how the child scored, but the way they remember it and reflect upon it is not an intentional deception, it's just a proud parent, okay? So I would say that in and of itself is not deceptive. But if I am giving a response to a question in a courtroom, and I know that if I answer, you know, it's like the question he asked in his sermon a few weeks back. Have anyone in here ever passed a sobriety test?
Oh, yeah.
You know, that's not a yes/no question, but he only gave us yes/no options. So how you answer the question determines how you will be judged. And you know, and this is what I talked about earlier, let the person who dealt with it, you know, tell their story. Because we can always do a good job of sharing whatever offense we may have done to help you understand as best we can that maybe, and a lot of times, we as Christians sin against each other and we don't even know it. We say or do something that causes offense and that was not our goal. And someone takes offense. They took offense, we're still obligated to apologize because we said or did something that caused offense. But in the conversation, we also get to say, please no, that wasn't my motive. And help me in the future, if I say or do something that way, let me know up front real quickly so I can ask you forgiveness and try not to do it again.
I was just gonna say, I think the onus really is on the offended.
Well, it is.
Many times, because then it festers if you don't say something.
Right. When you've been offended, the onus is on you, but we're not talking about burden of responsibility here like the court system would. We're talking about how you deal with things in your life. If I say or do something that causes offense, you know, maybe, especially if I do it as a pastor, I have to realize that it's hard to tell your pastor that was offensive to me. It doesn't matter how small it was. I sat in the pew for 20 years. There were things I was afraid to tell my pastor, so I get it, believe me. But that doesn't mean that I get to, you know, carry around this anger with me. That means I get to either let it roll off my back and say, okay, he probably didn't mean it. That's putting the best construction on it. Probably didn't mean it. I mean, and that's what putting the best construction actually encourages us to get in the other person's head who said or done something that has offended us and say, okay, that was offensive, but was that what they intended to do? Now, I'm talking about personal interactions here, but at the same time, I'm talking about how when we talk to each other, and if I'm talking to Gary about anybody else in this room and they're not there, all of my speech can only be glowing and beneficial on your behalf. That's what this says. Even if it's because he needs, you know, he got in an accident because he did something wrong. Well, I don't need to share that he did something wrong to get in the accident, but he got in an accident and he needs our prayer because he's hurting. You
I
see,
think there was a good example of all of this in the paper today, where we say we should put the best meaning on everything. You know, New York City is all up in arms because this one doctor came back with Ebola. Well, someone else has spoken up and said, you know, this man is the most caring and giving individual. He has spent
his whole life loving and caring for people.
loving and caring for people. And he does it with smiling and hugs in
Right.
addition to his medical training.
Right.
And I thought,
So give him the best.
he certainly,
Right.
whoever,
Deserves.
you know, spoke up and said that.
Well, not only that, people, you know, someone gets up in arms And I don't want to be unkind, but I just think that American media has chicken little the Ebola thing like crazy in America.
Absolutely.
You know, is it something to be concerned about? Yes. But
Not
the
top.
media, and I don't even watch, I haven't watched the big three in years, but I get all my news from what's flowing, I have to be honest, whatever is coming from Facebook. I scroll it 2 or 3 times a day, and then 1 or 2 news items, because I'm plugged into like 1,300 people, and if it's in the news, 1 or 2 people have shared something so when you hear me share something that I've heard in the news, I got it from Facebook. But not from Facebook, it's from one of the things that it sent me to.
So that's like third or fourth hand, though. So you see, you're not getting.
Well, it's not, it's directly. See, I'm hitting a link that takes me to the news story from NBC, CBS, and one of the other 50 different news agencies there are now online. All of them are doing primary and secondary report journalism. Unfortunately, there's not too much primary journalism going on anymore. You know, every newspaper, every news service used to employ journalists to go out and ask questions and get answers. But now, the guy in New York who goes and collects the information, he puts it on the New York Times, and every newspaper in America carries a piece of that story. So it's really and the editor of that paper gets to put his 2 cents in, you know? So,
But it's really a deadly business for a journalist to go into the Mideast.
yeah, it is.
They have a tendency to cut their heads off.
Yeah, it's, I actually, I mean, I've been following the maps for the Middle East. The little dots in the areas that are under contention are getting smaller, and I think it's a good thing. It's not spreading as much as it was in the beginning. So I'm always looking for a silver lining on that dark cloud. Anyway, we went down a foxhole there. Any questions? Thoughts or questions on we shouldn't lie? Okay. I didn't steal your thunder. It was tempting.
I was waiting.
Okay. 9th commandment. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. What does this mean?
We should fear and love God so that we do not scheme to get our neighbor's inheritance or house, or get it in a way which only appears right, but help and be of service to him in keeping it.
Okay. The thing we're going to notice with the 9th and 10th commandment is their commandments against sin that takes place in here. This is not telling you not to steal. It's telling you not to desire to steal, and not to scheme to steal. So let's define coveting here. 63. What is coveting?
Well, before you do that,
Yes.
do you have the subtitle in yours?
God's gift.
The 9th commandment, God's
Yeah.
gift of commandment.
Or
Contentment. And
Contentment,
so that's
right.
what I think it's all about.
Oh, it is.
Oh,
completely.
gosh, yeah, okay. Just
I
want to
mean,
make sure.
you have one little phrase, you know, the grass is always greener. There's so much truth in that phrase, and anyone who has gone from yard to yard to yard knows how unfulfilling that is. You know, this is the 10th state I've lived in, and I can't tell you how amazed I was in some of the wonderful. I lived in Hawaii as an adult for 6.5 years of my life, and at least half the people I worked with were miserable in paradise. They hated being and living in Hawaii. Could you believe it? It blew my mind. And it's because they chose to be miserable there. It was a choice to be a malcontent. I have very little patience for people like that. And and we've all had some times in our lives when we function that way. We also sometimes we have people in our lives that are that way. The oldest of my 3 sisters again. I love her dearly. But when we were youngsters,
Because she's not here now.
yeah, but she can view the recording. I didn't give her name, but she knows who she is, and I probably will tell her to watch this, and she will agree with me. But there were times I actually don't share things unless I have permission to share them too. By the way, she would agree that there was a time in her life when she was happiest when she was miserable. She had something to complain about. And that, we get into a rut. I actually think it could connect it for her. After our mother died, she was in a body cast for 6 months. And she learned how to be, for 6 months, all of her life was people waiting on her. And then once she had to start taking care of herself, she wasn't the center of attention anymore. So for a while, she had to learn how to be self-sufficient, even though she was already physically self-sufficient. And I mean, she suffered greatly in ways that I couldn't even imagine. But I know in my life, from having recovered from medical things, that, you know, you get over the physical part, but there's mental things that are, and or chemical connections to those things that are difficult to get through. So, but yes, she would agree with me. There was a time in her life when she was happiest when she was miserable. And we all go through times in our lives where we probably do such things. So.
Well, we all know people too.
Oh yeah.
Aren't
People who
happy
we love.
unless they're miserable.
Right. And you know, these are people, these are not some strangers. We know them because they're part of our families or they're part of our work environment. And we don't, you know, it's, you know, there's people in our congregation who I love that I make sure before I call them that I have time to listen to all they have to say. Because that might be the most interaction they get that day. And I need to be ready to give them that time before I call them. Because a 5-minute phone call is just not going to work.
Same way in the prayer chain, you always make that last call. That's right.
Well, we have a whole chain of people. You know what? I just got something in the email yesterday. There's a company that does, you know, I can make little messages, and I actually listened to the whole recorded thing before I went to the website and looked at it, and I thought to myself, you know what? This would rob from us a great tree of fellowship that exists within this church.
Yeah.
You know, if we were to automate this and everybody would get, you know, an automated phone call of my recorded voice. How many of you have listened to the whole recording when a recording called you? I see no hands going up. Just because you know me and know it's me calling, like, if you don't have time or interest to talk to me in person, I don't have to listen to the recording of your voice. It irritates me that I have to listen to a recorded voice for the 3 seconds that I do before I leave a message on your phone. You know, that whole long list of, yeah, it's like, why didn't they just say beep? Everybody knows beep means leave a message now. You know, press this button for this and that. I'm not going to press any button, stop talking so I can leave a message. I don't have an opinion on that, though.
Well, what about a broadcast email, though? When Pastor Detmer was ill, we had no clue what was happening, but a broadcast email would have brought all of us up to
Well,
date.
it was the information. It wasn't the way it was.
Yeah,
delivered.
it was,
Had we had the information.
yeah,
we
you
would
got it
have
as soon
called.
as we did.
Yeah.
And we do broadcast emails whenever, you know,
Keith does.
yeah. And maybe we just need to make him a regular part of the prayer chain. That's probably not a bad idea.
You're looking at me.
Well, well, you're one of the prayer chain people. I need to let Betty know that maybe she needs to call Keith every time. So an email with this stuff could go out too. I hadn't even thought of it. There you go. The things we learn in Catechism. Okay. What we got here? Oh good, we got 15 minutes. We might get through all of it, because the covenants are kind of, if you come from another Protestant tradition, these are one commandment for you, they're not two. The reason that Augustine separated, one is about property and the other is about things that breathe, people and things that breathe. Because you can entice those to come over, that's why they separated the two. But so we've defined what coveting is. It's being not content. It's wanting something and wanting to deprive someone who it belongs to. It all belongs to God. We're just coveting the stewardship of that thing. They are the steward of it, and we want to be the steward of it. And I often make the example, go ahead.
What if you just want one just like it?
No, that's nothing wrong. That's not coveting. It might be materialistic and idolatrous, but it's not coveting.
That is not putting the best spot.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. We always put the best construction on things from our perspective. There's nothing wrong with me saying, you know what, I like to get a model of whatever, the car or the dress or the thing. Well, actually, women don't want to have a dress that looks like another woman. That's a bad thing.
No.
That's an
It's an
interesting
insult.
dynamic. But for men, if you got something cool, I want something just like it. And if you see something that you want or you like, there's nothing wrong with doing the work to attain that thing. That's not coveting. And even thinking in your mind, I want to get one like that, instead of that. Okay? All right. Page 90. What coveting does God forbid in the 9th commandment?
Page 89 here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
God forbids every sinful desire to get our neighbor's possessions openly or by trickery.
Openly or by trickery?
Trickery.
We actually have laws that support these methods of taking things from people. It's called squatters' laws. These squatters' laws are in place basically because they were designed to help develop undeveloped places. But a person could basically go and live on a corner of a rancher's land somewhere that was undeveloped and prove that they'd lived there for 2 or 3 years. The rancher had so much land he didn't know that that little corner was being used, and petition the court to make it theirs. Why don't you just talk to the rancher? Or whoever's land you're building something on, maybe it would be good to know who it belongs to. It's coveting that piece of land without purchasing it, without going through the proper process of, even if you don't have, just because you don't have money doesn't mean you can't legally take ownership of something. The rancher may say, you know what, develop that corner of land. I'm good with that. I will go do the paperwork, put some stakes in, and you can have that little corner. Now, that might seem ridiculous, but more ridiculous things have happened. People have been more generous. Who knows about Campbell, the Campbell soup guy? You know what percentage of his income he lived in the last 30, 40 years of his life? He kept 10% and he gave 90% to God. He kept one out of,
He's
so
got
that,
his
you know,
tithe mixed up.
huh?
He got his tithe mixed up.
Yeah. Well, and see, that's where, if we get hung up on the 10% with a tithe, then once I'm at 10%,
I'm done.
I'm good. Well, you know what? If I have such abundance that I have, as someone that I know who has said in my presence that, now am I violating the 8th commandment here now? Has said in my presence, I have so much money, I'm worried about what to do with it. Now, that's no one who lives around here. But I thought to myself, I could help you with that problem. I didn't say it, I only thought it. But,
Is that coveting?
huh?
Is that coveting?
No, that's not coveting. That's being
That's joking.
facetious.
Well, I have a friend who said the money just keeps coming and we don't know what to do with it.
Yeah. Well.
And I gave her an idea.
Yeah.
She said,
Well, and see, that's just
it
it.
wasn't tax deductible.
Right. Well, and here's the thing. When you talk about that tax deductible, if I have so much money I don't know what to do with it, maybe God is blessing me for the purpose of being generous with that. Because it sitting someplace growing is not doing me any good, it's not doing anybody else any good, if I have more money than I could ever spend. So, just as it is incumbent upon the poor who are always with us to be there and live that life so that people can be generous and care for them, it's incumbent upon those to whom God has blessed with much to care for those people who are in need. If that was we wouldn't have a social network system in our country if people who are in need were cared for by those who have more than they can use, who are in the church. In our country, the church has kind of let the government take over all these things that the church should be doing. I'll be up front with you. The church should be doing all those things. But, okay, let's wrap up the 10th. What are we time-wise? I got people collecting out there. Okay, we're going to finish up the commandments, both the covenants. What does God require in the 9th commandment? 65 is my number on that question, bottom of 90.
We should be content with what God has given us and assist our neighbor in keeping what God has given that person.
Right, so not only, again, there's always a positive, and not only am I not to not think about taking it, but I'm to get to think about what I should do to help him and be content with what I have. And you know what? Contentment is something that's difficult for human beings. It's difficult for You would think it's more difficult for us because of marketing in our society, but the truth is, contentment is probably one of the most difficult mental things, regardless of where you are on the economic scale, because, you know, the two poor guys who have nothing but a little pot and a couple of beans, and the other guy's looking at what the color of the beans of the guy in the other pot, you know. Think about when you go to the restaurant. Is what comes to the table to you ever as inviting as what you thought it was when you see everybody else's plate? That's what we're, and it's part of sinful nature. Not being content with what we have is part of sinful nature. And learning that about ourselves so that we can be content and say, you know what, I really, and I think it comes with age too. I mean, we in our youth and our, you know, what do kids do? They fight over you can have a room with 1 million toys. And what do the two toddlers want?
The same.
The same toy. It doesn't matter what the toy is. It could be a clod of dirt. It could be a box that has no toy in it. But those two toddlers, that's the one they want because the other one has it. And that doesn't stop just because we stop being toddlers. We take that all the way to the grave with us. Even if we make it to 90 or 100 years old, I look at, you know, you see two people in the nursing home, and they're sitting, and you know what? I like that person's seat better than the one I'm sitting at.
Oh, now is there something about ladies' Bible study on Friday morning?
That's fun, though.
No, okay.
That's fun.
All right.
Yeah, no, her and Elizabeth Leiser have this little thing going on, the location,
Yeah.
for the non-women's Bible study people in the room. Okay. Other thoughts about coveting things. It shifts a little bit when we go to coveting things that breathe, people and animals. So, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his manservant, or his maidservant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. What does this mean? Volunteer.
We should fear and love God so that we do not entice or force away our neighbor's wife as workers against him, but urge them to stay and do their duty.
Now let me first ask this question about the commandment. Does this mean that people are property? Because that belongs to, we often associate with property. That's a question we probably don't often ask ourselves when we come across this commandment.
Well, certainly, Middle Eastern times they were.
Well, I would say that God's word never treats, you got to look at the whole picture. God never treats people as property per se. But the relationships that we have with each other, the relationships that slaves had with owners in the Jewish population, on the surface could be seen as something as ownership of a thing, property, objectifying that individual. However, relationships is what belong to us, not the individual. And that's a fine line. When we're talking about a dog or a cat, somebody, Billie Jean just lost one of her dogs. It was in an email that went out. She's a Women's Care Center director.
I didn't get that.
Yeah. And you know what? We're emotionally attached to that animal if it's grown up, and we grieve. Not the same as if we grieved an individual, although some people would prefer to be in the presence of their pets than other human beings. And sometimes I wouldn't blame them. But the thing is, what's lost when that animal or that person gone is not so much them as the relationship. Now with people it's different than it is with animals. God makes those definitions clear. It's not wrong for me to, you know, give a pet to somebody else and get another pet. But it is wrong for me to get rid of a spouse and get another spouse. Okay? Okay, so some relationships are interchangeable and some aren't. And here's the thing, when we talk about those things, that doesn't make it any more easy or difficult. Like I said, when we started this, speaking the truth in love is no walk in the park. But it is what we're called to do. Let's see if we can run through these. What coveting does God forbid in the 10th commandment?
God forbids every sinful desire to take from our neighbor, that person's spouse or workers.
Spouse or workers. Interesting that spouse and workers are put in the same, because, and I think this gives us a little window into how the people of Israel thought with regard to slaves and servants. You were part of a household. There wouldn't be a rule within the slavery rules of Jewish people if you, after 7 years, have worked off your debt. You could have an earring put in your ear on the doorpost and become a permanent person of that household. That option wouldn't exist if people didn't feel part of a family. I really think that this speaks more to family. Workers and servants in agrarian households in their society were seen and treated as family. You don't get anything out of an unhappy servant. So you do your best to make them happy so they're more productive.
Well, I think years ago when people had maids, I mean, this may have been more prevalent in the South.
Yeah, they were family members.
Excuse me, they were not slaves, but they were maids. And occasionally there would be a very good maid that everyone wanted.
Right.
So somebody would entice her away
Right,
by
exactly.
offering her a little more money.
Right, and that's what this, and this is the thing, you can't entice a house to come from somebody. You can entice, the example I always use with kids when I'm doing confirmation, I can say, you know what? It's okay for you to love animals and want to take care of animals. We'll wrap it up here. Because I know the choir will probably wants to warm up. It's okay for you to do that, but it's not okay for you, if your neighbor is being unkind to their dog, to put water and food on your porch and whistle and ask the dog to come over. Because you know the dog's not being fed and cared for over there. You go and knock on your neighbor's door and say, if you don't mind, I'd like to take care of the dog, and if you don't want the dog, I'll be glad to take it. That's different than, enticing the dog to come where the food and the water and the kindness is. Or offering the maid more money. It's the same thing. The same deleterious motive, to deprive the other of, let me see, we got Uriah's wife, that's a good read. That's where David gets confronted with, let's see, what does God require? We're probably going to, you know what? We're not going to finish this commandment. We're going to pick it up on page 92, because there's a couple more things I'd like to talk about there. Because it's a good thing to talk about. So we're almost done with 10 Commandments. Let's close with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever.